Hey, what's going on? Basically going to be doing this as a dry run through, first time watching it. I went ahead and started watching a few things, so I have a few kind of ideas of what I'm going to be looking at in the very beginning to point out. But there will be some times that I kind of stop, review, look at the whole battle, rewatch things, and just kind of take you through my process of what I'm thinking. I like to try to make it as transparent as possible because I'm not even going to try to pretend like I know everything, right? I want there to be kind of a discourse and a conversation about what's going on in the games that I'm reviewing. So when you send me something, when you come to me with something, I will use my base of information, my kind of cornerstone of knowledge, everything I've gathered over the years of kind of reviewing and learning about Overwatch to give you an informed assessment about what you could have been doing better. I'll also give you a third point perspective, and I'll also use my skills as a teacher to be able to communicate effectively and make sure that I break things down in a tiered way that will help you improve without kind of just giving you haphazard tips, right? If I tell you how to aim better, but your positioning is garbage, or if I tell you how to do tech, but you don't even know how to aim, there's kind of a inability to do the first thing I'm telling you because you don't have kind of the proper skills to get to that point. So I'm doing this as a dry run, like I said, just so that you can see my process. So I'm going to hit play on this. Hopefully the game audio isn't overpowering. You missed the shot. That means you lose the game automatically, and it's really disappointing. For future notice, I don't know if this is a loss or not because it doesn't show to me. It just says replay. But I prefer to review losses. It's more the mistakes are more prevalent, and it's easier to kind of prove to what I'm saying because it's right in front of you. You lost for a reason. When you win, sometimes you do bad things and it comes out good anyway. So you have a very standard composition here in terms of your tanks and your support line. Brig is going to be a monster no matter what, especially with her armor packs. But the first thing that I'm going to want to point out here, and let me get the spectate overlay so that you can see where everybody is. Can I not get spectate overlay in first person? Okay, I guess I can't get it in first person. But the first thing that we're going to want to pay attention to here is that you're taking an off angle from your team. So your team is going to be going along the right high ground, and excuse my camera work, but they're going to be going on the, or rather top left because you're on the opposite side. They're going to be going from the top left high ground, and they're going to be pushing that space, which is kind of a good standard space to take from for multiple reasons we don't have to go over right now. But basically, you're going to be doing a split push where you take a side angle and you're going to be able to get chip shots. Now, I'm not exactly sure why you took this side angle. It could just be kind of a strategy of yours to kind of get picks off to the side. But the first thing that I want you to be aware of is the fact that you have no protection over here. And although you don't know what you're pushing into, although you don't know you're pushing into a pharmacy yet, you don't know what you're pushing into at all, which makes it very dangerous. There's multiple types of compositions that would thrive on this positioning from you, particularly if the enemies are playing something like a dive or somebody who counters Widow quite effectively, like if they have Diva, Ball, Winston, Genji, Tracer, somebody else mobile who I can't think of right now. But the pharmacy is definitely going to give you a lot of problems just off the bat because you have to take this 2v1 on the split because the Pharah knows that you're going to be her biggest threat. So the first thing you do is you're going to come out here and you're going to take that opening shot. Not too big of an issue overall in terms of how this first fight goes, because eventually you do hit the shot. But the biggest thing about a split push is you don't have any support, so you have to be playing around the idea that you will not get saved if something goes wrong. You have to take every precaution then to make sure that nothing goes wrong, because you want to give the enemies the least amount of chances to kind of execute their plans and disrupt yours. So when you're coming off on these off angles, you really want to be somewhere where you could escape to a low grounds, because once you're here and you're engaged in the fight, your only option for escape is to use your grapple cooldown. But similarly to Winston and all these other dive heroes that have had to kind of change their play styles, Widow has continuously gotten value from playing from high grounds and then being able to drop and grapple to other high grounds. It kind of gives you a two-step escape process, right? So the first problem here is that you're not already on a high ground, so you can't drop and you can't escape to another high ground. It's not the biggest issue because you're playing against the Pharah, who has great vertical mobility, meaning that escaping to another high ground isn't going to necessarily be what you want to be doing. However, you take a very, very early shot. And what this allows the Pharah to do is allows the Pharah to target you and basically, focus on this isolation over here. And the reason that waiting for another shot would be beneficial is because as your team pushes into the enemy team, they'll start to demand resources and they'll start to demand attention. And when you're playing in solo queue, it's very easy for people to get tunnel visioned and focused. When you're playing in a team setting, a similar thing will happen where calls will kind of make it so that the enemies are disrupted and not disjointed, but their thoughts of like, oh, there's a widow on the side, let me go to them, are going to be kind of dragged towards where the team is calling. And if the team is calling towards the mass body fight, that 4 people unit up at top, or 5 people because your off tank should be up there, but I can't see them. I can see their little bubble underneath though. But yeah, if the enemy team is pulled towards your team's attention, then it'll give you more time and it'll make it harder for people to pull away from the fight that they've already engaged in, right? There's a good chance that once the Pharah sees your team, she'll start using cooldowns and such to engage on them, and you taking a delayed shot while in a hidden location or in a difficult to locate location will make it just better or easier for you to stay alive. But what's going to happen in this first fight is you're just going to win. And that's what happens sometimes with Widow, is you just win. Little kind of note here is that you don't camp this res, and it's not a big problem because in the end of the day your team is going to close in on this space, especially now that you've gotten rid of kind of the big target in the sky that they would be afraid of. So it winds up working out okay, but if you don't close in on this space, then the Mercy can get the res off and basically make that nice shot null and void. So just be aware of kind of, the fact that your team isn't going to always be able to do this. I don't know if you're queuing with any of these people. I don't know if you're in comms, and I don't know if they're in comms. So I largely have to assume that you're working with the standard kind of solo queue existence for a DPS, right? Maybe you're listening in, but nobody's really talking. There's no real cohesion. And anything that is a team-based thing isn't really done on purpose. It's more so coincidence and or just, you doing the right things for your characters and your characters synergizing the right way. There will be times where I'm sure your Reinhardt sees somebody doing something else, so he goes and does a particular thing for them. This happens more and more the higher in the elo you go, but I can't bank on it. So I can't say that your team filled in this space because they saw you get the pick on the Pharah and where the Pharah was. It's just a coincidence that they're going to fill in this space to push into point, and the Mercy doesn't feel safe getting this res. I think largely the Mercy could have gotten the res off, especially with the Moira in her kind of on her team, able to prop up the enemy's wall. She could get that res off, but either way, it doesn't happen, and you're able to kind of secure this point because of it. So now you're gonna take kind of another wide angle, hit another nice shot. It's a nice shot to me, at least. But basically now you have a similar problem, and this is what's going to wind up happening over the course of at least I know these first 2 fights, is that your support line isn't really looking to pocket you, but you're playing from a position that demands attention from your team. So as the fight goes on, you're going to slowly rotate to the other side, using your grapples to get some good looks, whatever. You're trying to get a nice pick. You do start off here, and I forgot this little segment because you're going to retreat from this side very quickly to get to the other side, I'm pretty sure. Okay, so this is where you start moving, right? So your team is already spread. Your Zarya is chasing after your Reinhardt. You'll see that your supports are kind of chasing after your tanks in a way. Your Brig doesn't know if she wants to go with the Reaper or not, who's going on a flank maybe a little bit too late. But you're basically going to take this very wide angle where you're sitting above, sure, but in the nest of the team. And the reason that I'm able to say in the nest of the team is because half of their team has the ability to give you some sort of contest on that high ground, right? And the Mercy really threw kind of like pocketing, but even the Zarya, if she wanted to, could lob grenades at you. And there's no way for anybody to protect you. Sure, you're antied at this point, but there's no way for the tanks to cleanse you with the bubble, to shield you from the anti or any incoming damage. There's no way for your supports to prop you up or give you armor packs or anything like that prior to kind of counter the damage that's going to come your way. You've given yourself this very isolated task. And although your team isn't really necessarily doing anything, they're playing this very slow style right now where they're kind of waiting to get to point. They're playing from the positions they feel more comfortable in, letting the Pharah rotate around them. You definitely play this very are playing this very kind of like quick style where you want to take the fight to the Pharah to get her out there, get her out of there as soon as possible. Sorry, I don't have good word in the mouth. It's bad most time. I apologize about that. But because you take this wide rotation where nobody can actually help you, the Pharah is able to isolate you and kill you, and then because you're out of the fight, she has free reign, right? You're the only thing stopping the Pharah from taking over this game largely, and the reason is because your Ana can't take shots on her if your tanks are taking a lot of damage. She also can't take shots on her if your tanks aren't giving good defensive positioning. So your tanks right now are neither protecting the Ana nor taking a lot of damage. Well, I mean, your Rhine is right now, but it took him a while to get into that location, and by the time he's already there, the fight's pretty much over. You're out of the fight. The contest is gone for the Pharah, so the Pharah takes down the Ana. So the Ana has no real chance against the pharmacy because she has nobody to protect her, and she has no alternative resource of the Pharah having to focus the Reinhardt, just because the Reinhardt's not being that aggressive. He's not demanding that much attention from the enemy team. So this is kind of what I had watched up until I started the VOD. So from here on out, we'll be largely just doing kind of like a raw review, and I'll be probably looking over stuff. So I want to question your positioning a little bit overall. There's been a few times, I mean, there's only been 3 fights, so I guess there's only been 3 times, but you've constantly taken this midway path, and from what I can tell, it almost seems like you're somebody with high mechanical skill, but maybe not the greatest awareness or game sense. I hate saying that because I think people take it as an insult. It's almost like I'm saying, yeah, you're strong, but you're also dumb. But that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you have a good fundamental understanding of how your character can get advantage over other characters, largely through abusing their movement and your just natural ability to move the mouse around. But you haven't had the need to take into account all the other kind of like resources of the game in order to win your games, right? You've been able to just carry through your mechanics alone, or you've been able to just get by through your mechanics alone. But now we want to start taking into enemy compositions, your compositions in the map, in order to kind of take you to that next level, right? So when you're playing on this map, and oh, I hate this ticking noise, but I guess we gotta let it go because it looks like you're gonna contest for a second longer. But when you're playing on this map, you have these long sight lines from this high ground. You have that far off coast side that's isolated by that big building over there. And you have a lot of kind of trenchy low grounds that surround the point. But Widow's gonna get most of her value by taking kind of like these longer sight lines from the high ground, or as you had started, those off angles to kind of, you know, contest from a different area. The problem is that when you get there, you don't have too many options in terms of actual angles on the point if you're up here, and there's often kind of like a lot of area that you can't exactly see. So a good idea for Widow on this map, at least as far as I understand, of course, is that when you're recontesting a point like this, right? Because initially you had started from main choke and your team came up here, and that was fine because you were going for a split push. You don't want to clump up with your team as Widow in that type of situation necessarily, because it's likely to get you splashed against the Pharah. So it was actually pretty good that you went split. She took the shot too early. But once you're coming on that recontest and your team is already on point, you want to come up here, right? And this will give you a sight line onto point, it'll give you a sight line onto the high ground, and it'll give you plenty of sky space to see the Pharah from wherever she comes. But as you continue kind of taking this fight, maybe you take 3 shots here, you're going to slowly want to take this rotation up here. Now this is just a longer version of the rotation you took in the very first fight, right? You were very up close to the point, and you were able to take that shot into their backline onto the mortar easily because you had an angle that they weren't aware was there necessarily. They were putting their backs to their spawn, and they felt safe in doing so, which is generally a fairly good thing depending on who you're playing against. But by taking this longer sight line, especially on a recontest like this, What you allow yourself to do is you allow yourself to, one, you can force the Pharah to kind of have to come over you and in front of you, right? Instead of having her come from, let's say if you're looking at point over here, she's going to come from your left when you're looking straight ahead. The Pharah is going to come from over your head and you're shooting to the right, and she's going to be moving to the right. So there's going to be a greater opportunity for, well, not necessarily, not if Pharah sees your shots, like if she sees where they're coming from or somebody calls them out, she's going to have the opportunity to come through here or to drop onto your head from above. But if you take quick shots and then retreat back, then she won't be able to kind of take those opportunities, because she won't have the time to close that distance unless she's like God or something, you know? Unless you've taken one shot and then you took forever to take the second shot and she closed the distance in that time, Pharah's not necessarily going to be able to kind of like get in your face and chunk you down. Which, as Widow, the one thing you don't want to do is have a Pharah get in your face, right? In that 1v1 matchup, part of the objective of the Pharah is to use the map geometry to close distance, because Widow doesn't have as easy a time hitting shots at close distance, and Pharah's projectiles are not so slow that they're impossible to hit at close range, right? They're so big and bulky that when you get in somebody's face, you can kind of splash them really easily, but they're also easy to direct hit. You can kind of like partner in melees if they're low enough and such. But because you have this such close angle up where you are right now, you're forcing or you're not forcing, but you're allowing the enemies to kind of close that distance really easily, and giving yourself not harder shots, because this isn't the hardest shot depending on where you're comfortable with your mechanics. Like if you're comfortable with hitting shots like this, then that's fine, but you're giving yourself the shield, right? You're saying, I'm gonna basically have to hit that one shot that's open to me, because you're playing into the shield, whereas you could be playing from like this back sight line, and you could be giving yourself the distance with only the Pharah to worry about. And as long as you play it right, you can let the Pharah kind of play into your sight lines, rather than the Pharah being able to see your glowing red hitbox all the way over here as she closes over those buildings over there. So there's great mechanical skill just in your playstyle that gets displayed almost all the time. It seems like you're able to consistently kind of hit these arcing flick shots, even though they're body shots, and I see you're going for the headshots. I can see you're going for the headshots, and that's a good indicator that your mechanics are comfortable and that you feel confident in your ability to hit those shots. It would have been nice to see you take a shot at the Pharah. I don't know if you kind of like just zoned out as you came out of spawn, but you definitely had a nice little shot. Actually, let me rewind so I can see how much of a shot you had. Might have been too far. But just try to be aware the entire way through. Small kind of side note: don't put the mouse down right here. You have a nice, she's done not even looking at you, she's kind of gently floating. It looks like she might have used her rocket boosters to get that height already. Yep, there it is. So you know, this, just be aware, kind of like keep your eyes open, because you missed that little opportunity there to put pressure on the enemy team. And even if you take that shot and it gets rezzed, it gets rid of the res and you have less pressure later. So let's see where you go now. Let's see what your next move is, because it looks like you're taking this high ground. The Pharah's above you. Good sights before you peek. Nice shot. Reaper cleans it up. Okay. Solid, solid. And now you have this wide sight line here that I was talking about before, which is good, because it means you already know about it, right? It's just a matter of getting you to use it. Nice shot. Getting you to use it when your team's already engaged on point, right? You want to recognize now that sightline is good anytime that there's focus on the point, and you want to go through main choke anytime there's focus on the high ground. And there's going to be focus on the high ground 2 times: when the fight initially starts and when teams are coming to recontest. So teams can come down main. I have kind of like a stretch of my SR, and it's not very impressive, to be fair. I'm horrible mechanically, but my tank is in plat, like mid plat, and then my DPS is all the way down in silver. So in silver, the teams are always going to come through main choke, and I'm sure as you get in higher elos, it'll be less frequent that they come down main choke, but they're still going to do it sometimes. And I know that because in plat, They still come down main choke 50% of the time, but they often start going to the high ground more often. Well, often, twice, whatever. But the idea is that they understand everything more, so they're able to utilize the map geometry and know different routes and know kind of like what's good for their character. So it's probably likely that people are going to go to that high ground. And I'm sorry if you hear any background noise or anything. You know, people are still moving about and doing stuff, but again, you forgo that angle. I'm not exactly sure why. It forces you to use your grapple now, a cooldown that would have been great for escaping the Pharah. Your Brig doesn't armor pack you. Your Brig hasn't armor packed you at all, which is a strong indicator that you're not getting any attention from her. I haven't seen her armor pack anybody pre-fight, to be fair. But we're not here for the Brig. We're never here for the Brigs. Oh, she did armor pack you. That's crazy. Don't mind this angle. It's just necessarily difficult because I'm pretty sure you're gonna force your supports now to come to you and abandon the tanks or to let you die, right? Anna's losing her shit with her jacket there, but this position isn't terrible except that it kind of like isolates you from your team again. And I understand that you're getting the off angle, you're fighting the Pharah, you're trying to do your job and contest her, and this is giving your team an advantage, right? You're not giving no value to this fight right now, but you are taking a big risk, because if you wind up losing this fight before your team wins their fight, then you automatically just lose your team that fight, because then there'll be nothing that they can do against the Pharah, so they'll have to fight a 6v5. Right now what you're doing is you're letting them fight a 5v4, which is why you're not getting no value, even if you're not hitting any shots, right? Not saying you're not hitting any shots, just a hypothetical. Even if you're not hitting shots, you're getting value because your team's fighting a 5v4. So this angle kind of isolates you and puts a lot of demand on your mechanical skill and risks a lot. And again, you're playing from the low ground, which gives you very limited escape options. You'll always have to use your grapple to get out. There's not a lot of corners or high grounds you can use to break a line of sight, like you can't drop down. It looks like you've lost the Pharah, so I don't think you could have heard the Pharah. I was trying to think if I had heard her through my headset. It seems like you've done a decent job so far of like keeping track of where she is, aside from a few small moments. But things like this, there's nothing that you can do. And this is part of the reason why you also don't want to be taking those isolated fights against the Pharah, is because there's going to be situations where she just straight up wins, right? If you have walls, you straight up win, because she can't even hide, because the second she comes out, she loses. If she has barrage and you're fighting a 1v1 against her, she pretty much just straight up wins, because you're not going to be able to charge your shot before she gets that barrage off. And I know this because on this map, Pharah can concussion about half the distance of the map from any point. Like if you treat point as the center, Pharah can concussion from any of the buildings to about point, from like their spawn to your spawn. So as long as you're playing that horizontal axis there, basically, you're not going to be able to beat her when she has barrage, because she could just always concussion and barrage onto you. But if you're playing that, let's say if it's the z-axis or something, that left right of point area, she might not be able to make it, but the mercy pocket is going to make it so that you can't do too much about her unless you hit the headshot as she closes that distance. And she can also use the obstruction of point to close that distance without you getting line of sight. So this is one of the problems with taking that isolated fight, just to reiterate, is that once either of you get ult, one of you pretty much win. And seeing right now is you've already used your ult, you just lose this fight, right? Not terrible, because you have 96% and you can build up team ultimates and come back, but you can't bank on your team building up team ultimates in this game, because you're assumably solo queuing, and you're you're possibly not in comms with your team to kind of like communicate that idea. Flip back. So again, you start on this sideline, but let's see if you stay on this sideline, because you do have a tendency of just closing that distance. Good kill. Okay, so when you play from this high grounds right here, make sure that you're using these insides of these buildings. You want to be playing in the doorways or something like that against the Pharah. And although it's gonna kind of make it easier to hit you because there's something about the doorway that's just a little like a portal. Maybe it's because you can splash it against the frame instead of having to splash it against the wall or something like that. But if you play with the chance to retreat to these inside areas, you give yourself the opportunity to break that vertical line of sight. And kind of grapple out from here, right? So if you're playing from in here, you break that line of sight, you can retreat back to spawn shore here. But if you wanted to, you could always grapple from the inside, suddenly come out and try to hit the shot. You also need to be looking for the Pharah when she is coming out of spawn. This will require using the tab key to check when she's come out of spawn, or just having good sense of timing, knowing when she died and when she's going to be coming back. So she died a little bit after you, so you have to be pretty much looking for her by the time you get back, because she's going to be only a few seconds behind you in terms of the recontest. And the best time to shoot at Pharah is when she's engaging over those buildings. In a Pharah v Pharah matchup, the Pharah who's playing defensively has an advantage. And the reason is because Pharah coming over those buildings is going to require either time to build up that kind of like height, or she's going to be limited in her mobility due to her cooldown usage, as well as the fact that you could splash against the building that she's trying to come over, or she'll have to go to a very, very open sight line. It also creates a nice point for you to put your reticle, so the Pharah is going to come from her spawn, but you could be anywhere in the map technically, because you have map control when you're playing defense, right? So it gives you kind of like better sight lines in terms of that. You know where to kind of put your reticle. It kind of makes the shot a little bit easier. So you can play from these inside areas, especially playing from this mega over here would be helpful, because now you have to run to the mega instead of already being there. I saw you playing there a few times here, but when you play from here, you don't have like, the enemies are playing on the other side of the objective. You can't see anybody, but at least if you played from here right now, you'd be able to take shots at the Zarya, see point, and look over the horizon, which is 3 good sight lines, because what it allows you to do is put pressure on somebody if nobody's there, contest the Pharah if she comes over, and prevent them from staying on point, right? It makes them afraid of point, and that's good for kind of keeping their DPS and their supports in check, because it tells them that there's not a safe space where they thought there was a safe space. But you're losing these initial battles, or at least you're losing the start of these initial battles. You're losing the chance to have the jump on the Pharah because you're not keeping track of when she's coming back, and you're not looking for her. So now she's just going to chase you down because she got the jump on you, close the distance, and hit the first shot. And with either of you, it's 2 body shots basically. And yes, Widow can hit the headshot, but it kind of puts her in a slight advantage where even if you were to say like try to turn around and 180 her or something and hit a nice shot, it still will take 2 body shots, which is the shot you're more likely to hit than nothing, you know? I work a lot on theoretical principles, and I try to strip away a lot of the variables to see if you had done something here, or if you had tried something different here, what are the variables that we can kind of strip away so that we don't have to think so abstractly about the game, so that we can think in min maxes, right? What's the best case and what's the worst case, and then how do we work within those parameters? So the variables there are the shots that you're going to hit. So the worst thing that you can do is hit no shots. The best thing you can do is hit a headshot, and really the middle ground is hitting 2 body shots. So when she has the jump on you, you're banking on 2 out of 3 of those, right, are going to be losses because she's already hit one of her shots. So unless you hit the headshot, she wins. 2 out of 3 isn't great. So we're stripping away those variables and trying to isolate the instances so we can see where what's really worth it, what's really feasible, and what really works, right? So you're coming down main again with your team, not taking those side angles anymore. Maybe not bad, because here at least you get protection, but nobody touches, and oh, that's painful. But I will say here, you're playing a game where your tanks don't really have a lot of presence or effectiveness, and I don't think that your Ana is doing too badly, because what it seems like for me is she has a fairly good response time, at least healing you when you're in her sight line. Now, I don't know what that looks like for the tanks. I haven't been paying attention to them, but at this point, you have to have at least felt that you didn't have as much space as you wanted to work with, and that you had to you were constantly being pressured by the enemy team, at least the Pharah, and you needed to either hit all of the headshots or you would lose. But The problem here is that yes, your team maybe isn't playing up to par, but you're also playing in positions that put you in vulnerable situations and bank a lot on your team winning their fights. If you're able to kill this Pharah a lot easier, Pharah v Widow is a lot like Widow v Widow, right? You take out the enemy Pharah, you take out the enemy Widow, and you are allowed to reign free and just shoot for days. It becomes sort of a shooting gallery where there's nobody to contest you, right? So you need to take out the Pharah so that you can carry these fights a little bit harder, because once you take out the Pharah, you have the mechanical skill, but your positioning and your awareness of where the Pharah is coming from, or when she's going to be there at least, is causing you to be caught out a lot and have a lot more pressure on you than needed, right? You're letting her close those distance, you're letting her get those first shots, you're letting her isolate you from your supports, which is one of the things that, like, she has a Mercy with her most of the time. If you had any support with you, at least it would be more of a fair fight, but you're taking this 2v1 constantly, and it's causing you to lose these fights again and again. It was a close game, but your tanks didn't have the ability and skill to contest and use their ultimates to carry out the fight. The fights that you won were the fights where you got the 3 headshots in the grab, the fights where you killed the Pharah first, the fight where I don't fully remember, but I'm pretty sure every fight that you won against this Pharah, you've had to kill her first and then deal damage, considerable amount of damage to the enemy teams. It's not the worst thing, right? Having to deal damage to the enemy team is kind of your job as a DPS, but it can also be, you know, picked up sometimes if you're contesting the Pharah and giving your tanks that kind of leverage there of not having to deal with her. They could also be dealing the damage. So there's certain levels of it that you could be banking on your team to kind of help you out a bit more, but if you're solo queuing especially, this is a solo game in some aspects, and you have to be able to be the lone star. Speaking of the lone star, McCree now. It's a Texas reference. Also, you have the star spray, which is pretty funny. Okay, you're taking this wide angle. I'm going to assume that you're... I was going to say for a second, actually, that I was going to assume that you're going to win this fight. And the reason is because on this map, it's a lot more obvious that you want to be playing on that wide right side and kind of like contesting from there, because it's just so good, especially for McCree. But I think that your tanks are going to have a hard time pushing into this Junkrat, and it's going to cause you a lot of problems. Because what's going to happen is the enemy team is going to be able to focus on you with their hooks and everything. Like, oh, you already have High Noon. That's great, High Noon. But they're going to be able to focus on you and everything because your tanks aren't going to have too much presence just running into this Junkrat. But you're carrying out this fight now because you have that wide right angle, so I'm not sure. It's going to come down to if your tanks can live long enough against that Junkrat, and if you utilize that right side and those flank sides to kind of keep pressure on the enemy as much as possible. Maybe you win this whole thing in the end. Who knows? I don't. They don't tell me anything. So that Junkrat's gonna come, he's gonna put pressure on you. Interesting, instead of putting pressure on the tanks. But that's okay, because you're just a weaselly little bastard and you can slip between his grenades, rather. But now he's gonna push you. Okay, so this is similar to the Pharah thing, right? You're aware of a danger, but you're not taking any precautionary action against that danger. That Junkrat was already pressuring you. You decided to ignore him, which is not a terrible thing, but you also give him the ability to close that distance without giving him any credence, right? If you're not hitting the shot, sure, you should try to hit shots that you can actually hit, right? Go on to the fight that you might actually be able to win. Try to leave that fight. But you don't try to leave that fight, you just ignore that fight, basically. And it lets the Junkrat close the distance on you and kind of like confirm that kill. And as it seems, it's needed to be you largely to win this fight, win these fights, like I've said, right? You needed to get a decent amount of kills, put a decent amount of pressure on the enemy team in order to push through. Big fans, high skill fans. Okay, so now you have the space, you push that choke, your Ryan steps in front of you, which is very, very nice. Thank you, Reinhardt. Now you just are holding and controlling the space, you're putting pressure into their shields. Not bad. Decent shatter, big shatter, fat shatter, small shatter, who really knows anymore? Okay, you your tanks push a little bit far forward, let some people get through. You're still getting the kills though, you're still dealing the damage, but now your tanks have a little bit more of a advantage space here. Now that you've taken that point, that Junkrat pushed you, but you still wound up winning. Your tanks are just in a good position, and I guess they know how to utilize that area more. There's sometimes when you're playing like certain characters, certain matchups, certain maps that you just don't know what to do with your character, and I think that your Reinhardt didn't know how to engage onto that first point, but maybe knew how to hold the choke on that second point. So after you clutched out that fight, your Rein was able to stabilize with the Brig and Iana having very narrow, limited sightlines, so they were very much on top of the Reinhardt with him, with the Zarya, so they were able to get through that, which is good on your team. Nice job clutching that one fight. I'm not going to comment on too much more else because you did wind up winning. I don't like saying things that are during one fights because it's sometimes just hard to prove in a way. You know, you might have done something wrong, but at the same time you wound up winning, so what's the real harm is sometimes the logic. It's easier to point it out when things have gone wrong. I didn't see too much that I wanted to point out that might be important anyway, right? I think the big thing that I'm taking away from this is your positioning and awareness of where the pressure and danger is coming from needs to kind of be a little bit sharper. You need to be more attentive to the people who are really putting pressure on you, and even if you can't hit the shots, at least be aware of the people who are going to try to close the distance on you over time to try to eliminate you quickly. Those spam damage Pharah Junkrats are looking to close that distance because their projectile is so large that it's easy to hit at close range. So this is similar to the first thing, right? To the first point. Unfortunate Mori loss. Oh no! Juicy. Unfortunate that you died to that Junkrat, but that Pharah Junkrat is going to try to do the same thing. They're going to try to close the distance and hit that big spam. Your tanks don't really know how to engage onto this point because it's a big, wide open space where they have to push in deep and have to depend on their supports. So maybe they don't feel backed up enough by their supports. Maybe they don't know that they have to do that, but your tanks are definitely leaving a lot to be left unwanted. But I think that you could be using the kind of like left side high ground over here. Ooh, let's see what happens. I like the high ground a little bit more because it makes it harder for people to get up to you. But from where you were, this is definitely great, especially for the high noon. Excellent high noon. Decent flash. But again, you have to come up big for your team. What was that Zarya doing? Was she just standing there? Hold on. Hold up a second. A little bit more back. What was that? Sorry. Oh no, okay. So yeah, I had seen her through the peripheral, so I was wondering what was going on, but she was further back than I thought she was, so I thought she had just stood still for a little while, but in actuality, she didn't have line of sight with the point. So you clutch out this fight. Excellent, deal tons of damage. Your tanks are able to kind of like come back after they had died. They had taken plenty of attention for you to get off that high noon, and that's great, but largely they're not doing anything to create opportunities. And I think there's a bit of a tiered system to it that gets a little bit annoying with, especially when you're playing comp, but even when you're playing in a team, is your tanks have to make space, but they can't make space without the support supporting them while they make space. But in order for them to feel like they want to make space and it's good to make space, the DPS have to capitalize on that, right? And then for the DPS to capitalize on it, they also need a bit of support. So but the supports also can't do anything if nobody's making space and nobody's killing the enemies or keeping the pressure on them. So it's kind of like everybody works off one another, but if even one of them isn't doing their job, then the rest of them can't. Watch your peripherals a little bit more. I don't think you really could have seen that Ana. She seemed to be on the edge, and I can see through walls right here, so it's a little bit easier for me to say. But I feel like she was, as you kind of flung your reticle past her, I feel like you might have been able to spot her out and get that free kill there while she was, coming out of scope and transitioning. Lucio on fire is the funniest thing. Like, it's not funny, it sounds horrible, but it's hilarious. To be honest. Like, it sounds like he's actually on fire. So you get grabbed there, there's not much you could do. I would have played split from my team this entire time just because the tanks had kind of, like I had said, they're showing that they're not really going to make space. They kind of give it up really easily. They're playing on the backup point when the enemy pushes in. they only know how to take advantage of like large gaps of space or like really exaggerated choke points where they have obvious advantages. Ooh, unfortunate. But yeah, I would have played split just because of that, because your tanks don't really seem to have a good grasp on how to hold space and how to create opportunities for you. So playing with them means that you're going to be backing up, you're going to be under a lot of pressure, and you know, just going to be a generally dangerous position. But there you just get grabbed, so there's not really too much you can do about that. You get grabbed, you lose that fight. Oh no, the Mega's gone? Okay, Lucio's there. Ooh, unfortunate. It was a good sleep by the enemy, Ana. When you're playing with the team, you would want to play around the team more. Actually be in a situation where they can protect you while you're high nooning, maybe speed you around the corner while you're high nooning, give you a bit more healing or resources. Somebody could even just body block, like the Lucio could just be like, I'll take this shit for you, because high noon can be a big ultimate. But here, there's not much you could do about that. You pop the high noon from a decent distance away, and like I said, that's not the biggest concern of where you high noon from. I would more so say, again, the positioning and awareness of who's a threat to you, because then there's a few fights you don't lose, whereas you getting slept while you high noon from a safe distance seems like a minor thing, right? Because that's something that gets ironed out, I think, with teamwork and with synergy and stuff like that, or just by going on the flank, which is something that you've shown that you already know how to do. You just were mixing up your style, trying to keep the enemies on their toes, and it just didn't work out that time. Good swap onto the Tracer all the way through. I like the way that you're playing into them very aggressively with your blinks. I think your recall gives you a good opportunity to kind of like stave off the damage that they're doing in a way, right? The space that your tanks is making doesn't matter for Tracer, because you're able to kind of just get in and out when you need, right? You don't depend on anybody to make space. You just take advantage of whatever the enemy gives you, which is really can be as small as a pocket distance between a support and the tank itself. But overall, like I said, the positioning in terms of knowing where to come from and holding angles that are safe for you, playing on high ground so that you can drop and use your grapple after, playing next to megas, closer to megas, or playing in better areas where you can break line of sight, so playing closer to corners and stuff like that, will help you in a lot of situations, I'm sure. Being more aware of when you want to push in, and like what part of the fight you're pushing into. So your team is mid-fight. Okay, how should I re-engage into a mid-fight? Go to the high ground as Widow and take this drastic backline angle where they may not be expecting me, because the enemies are too engaged onto the fight to really think about it. You won the last two, so there's not as much for me to say on them, because like I said, I don't like saying things about victories. It becomes harder to prove points. But I think that your mechanics are good. You just need to be more aware of the positioning and the threats that are around you and that could close the distance. That Junkrat on the second map was putting pressure on you, and you didn't hit those few shots. But once you don't hit those few shots, he's not going to stop shooting at you, right? Junkrat's a spam character. He's not reliable in his ability to hit shots anyway. That person is not deterred by their inability to hit you. They're also not going to leave. I think he poked away to maybe grab healing or something like that, or maybe you thought he was going to retreat, but you still have no protection there. You're still very vulnerable. You're not playing like around the pillar or in the pillar very much. You sat there for a little bit too long, even though the enemy had already kind of put eyes on you, had put shots on you. Usually when the enemies put shots on you, that's a good idea to reposition, just because then they know you're there and it's easier for them to think about going back to fight you. So it's kind of a minor thing, and I think it depends on the nuance of the match. So I'm trying to give you a sentence that you can maybe repeat to yourself to say like, okay, this is the situation, or this is the trigger that I need to be looking for. But largely you just have to be aware of the people who are putting pressure on you, and their ability to close distance once you kind of start ignoring them, or once they're coming from spawn. You know, you can give preemptive attention to them. So I repeated myself a lot, and that's because we really want to emphasize those points. But If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, let me know. If you have other VODs, let me know. And I'll probably send a little intro paragraph about, my comfort stuff, so I'm not going to say it right here. You've been watching something for long enough, or listening. A lot of people listen to this stuff as podcasts, so yeah.